It turns out there are 12 days in Christmas. Not 9, 12. And I had COVID for all 3 of the extra ones. I survived, and thank you for those of you who got in touch to check on me. I appreciate that. I really do. My kids and I all got it on Christmas Day when we got together for dinner. And between us, we'd had like 29 vaccines. So, yeah, there you go. That's life. Anyhow, it's 2022. And I'm going to start out the year by thanking my Patreon supporters. Thank you. I really appreciate you. I appreciated you all last year, and I'm already appreciating you this year. Thank you to everybody who wished me well over the holidays. We're doing something different today. You know, for the last couple of years, I've given a lot of talks. I give talks between videos to camera clubs all over the world when they can't get a landscape photographer. And last year, in the winter time, I got invited to go and speak at a town called Kelso, which is in the south of Scotland, right where it borders with England. That was a neat invitation to get, because that's an area of the world I'm very familiar with. I used to spend my summer holidays there. It was nice to be invited. So I went and I talked. I didn't go physically. I went on the Skype, and we did our session, and it was well received, and they invited me back again this year. They very kindly agreed to let me share with you my presentation from today. We're talking about the special problem of the very small in macro photography. It's long. Get a beverage and some popcorn and cheese straws. You have cheese straws where you are? If you don't, speak to the government. You need cheese straws. They're the best. I only ever eat them at Christmas. That's not true. I eat them all the time if I can find them. Hope you enjoy it. The 4-hour exercise that I set myself was to stay at this stone and photograph everything I could find on it. And I didn't know if it was going to be a very boring 4 hours or a very fascinating 4 hours, but it turned out to be life-changing for me. But first of all, there wasn't anything on the stone that I could see. It's just a lichen-covered chunk of granite in the middle of this clearing. So as time went by and I looked closer and closer, I started seeing quite a lot of life. And this is a constant thing in macro photography. I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, but the slower you move, and the more time you allow to pass, the more you start to see. And it works every time for me, but I'd never tried it to such an extreme extent. And after a while, I started seeing things, and I don't think I was hallucinating. I think they were really there, which is why I took the photographs. This guy was with me the whole time. The whole 4 hours, he would follow me around the stone to see what I was up to. And I've got more pictures of that spider than any other in my collection. But over the 4 hours, I started finding things like this, which is an assassin bug nymph that is absolutely minuscule. This is a crop of a much larger photograph, because I didn't have anything with me but a macro lens. And I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that this rock was a city of activity of bugs this size. That's when I thought, you know, there must be a way to not just document these, but create art around these. There must be a way to photograph stuff this small that anybody could do, but there's nothing about it in the literature. There aren't books on doing this. There are a couple of books, actually. There's one by a guy named Julian Cremona. I'm sure some of you have got his book. He deals with a lot of small stuff, but a lot of it's aquatic. And as far as terrestrial creatures go, not much. So I had to start figuring things out. How could I get from seeing a tiny, tiny bug on the ground, on a tree, on a leaf, to getting a high quality, high resolution photograph of it in my studio? Because everything that we do in macro photography is not attuned to that kind of scale. So let's define what I mean by very small. I think that everybody would agree that we define macro as 1 to 1 or thereabouts, so life size on your sensor. And I think most people would think of 5 times magnification as being pretty extreme. If you've ever used a 5 times objective, it's a lot of content on a camera sensor. I think of the very small as being anything really, any creature or plant that I can fit the entire thing, the entire area of interest onto one frame. Now that means that at 5x we're talking about small creatures, but at 20x we're talking about minute things. And as time has gone by, my interest has moved more and more to the minute. Those of you who follow my channel or have seen my work before know I do a lot of work with ants and other smallish insects. This thing is huge compared to the stuff I'm going to be showing you today. We're talking about wasps like this one that are about 2 millimeters in length. And 2 millimeter wasps are hard to see, let alone catch and clean and put on a pin and photograph. But what I'm going to do today is walk you through my process of how I find these specimens, how I get them ready to photograph, and then all the things I have to do to overcome the fact that these things are so fragile and so tiny. This little chap that's waving at you will show up a couple more times in this talk. He's a tortoise beetle, and we have these quite commonly around here, and they start out life small, and I think they get smaller as they grow old. This is about 2 millimeters across his back, and he's an absolutely lovely specimen, though he's missing a piece of his shell. This is a very typical find for me to get. This is him from the front. He can't stop waving goodbye. His arm was broken, apparently, his leg. Anyhow, tiny, tiny insects. That's what we're dealing with. This is the forehead of a damselfly that I don't normally harvest damselflies and dragonflies, but this one got caught in my net and ended up being sacrificed. And I've never seen a photograph of their simple eyes. They have this cluster of simple eyes on the top of their head for spotting predators. Not that there's much that predates these things except dragonflies, but this is a super close-up image, but it's a close-up image of a very big insect compared to the things we're going to be looking at. This is the starting point. This is when I go to find these really tiny insects. This is what I come home with. That is the proceeds of half an hour sweeping bushes with a net. I use a badminton racket. I've got about 5 of them now, and I've sewn nets for them. They don't last that long because I'm very poor sewer. But the idea is just like an entomologist would do. I sweep the bushes and the nets, barely touching them, except when the leaves fall in. And we'll do that up and down the hedgerow for half an hour, and then I'll take everything that I collect from that and take it home and dump it out on a plate. The piece of paper you can see in there was some ethyl acetate that I put in the collection vessel as I'm heading home. One thing about very small organisms, if you live in a location that's warm like mine, even in the winter, but in the summer, most definitely, in the time it takes me to drive from this park to my house, which is 10 minutes at the most, if I have not put this catch in alcohol, half of the insects of the size I'm looking for will have already started to bloat from decomposition, which is not something that you would think about. Um, so it's worth bearing in mind. Uh, with large insects, that's not an issue. I harvest larger insects and I don't put them in alcohol until hours later, and they do just fine. But these little things are very fragile. This is what the the contents of the collection jar look like. And you'll see by the end of this talk, you'll understand that I don't collect that often and I photograph everything in the collection. So I am going to show you the highlights from one day's collecting as this talk progresses. You're probably looking at this and picking out a dozen or so recognizable insects. There are hundreds of insects in that photograph. The things that look like twigs and bits of dirt, they're insects too. The numbers are staggering. When you can actually walk down the street where I live, waving the net in the air and not seeing anything, and coming home with half a dozen little flies. So it's one of the big draws of this kind of macro photography, and I'll refer to this again as we go through. It's so thrilling to go out, spend half an hour sweeping the net, and come home and spend 6 hours looking through this stuff under the microscope and seeing things every single day I do it that I've never seen before. There are that many species. It's been estimated that something like half of the insect species and protean species in the country, America, have not been documented. Um, that is amazing to me that I can go out with a net and find things that I can't find in the books. I have to send photographs of a lot of my stuff to the local university that has an entomology department, and they help me ID stuff. I have no doubt that if I keep doing this any length of time, I'm going to come up with something they haven't seen before, and that is exciting to me. And it's what I like to show people with my photographs is the stuff that they see buzzing around in the evening at their picnic and have no idea what it is. I like to show them what that is, and it kind of changes the way people react with the environment a little bit. I end up putting alcohol in my plate, and everything becomes a sea of alcohol. That's why it always turns green. The reason for this is that it's the only way I can stop everything in its tracks and prevent any bloating or decomposition. And then what I'll do is I will sort through this, and it will take anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to pull out every single intact specimen, put it in a bottle, label it, and get it ready to clean, pin, and photograph. This is my workstation. It's actually my studio and my dining room and my living room and television room and microscope room. It's my only room in the house, really. It's a big room. I have a table there that's laid out for my work when I get back in with a collection. Each of those little pots on the table there are the well, they're not the size of, they actually are lip balm containers, the things that you stuff you put on your lips if you live in Scotland so that they don't crack open from the cold and the sleet. That's what they are. And each of them represents one catch or one trip out. And each of them contains over 100 cleaned and sorted insects. The rest of the stuff on the table is probably pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to go through the equipment that you need, but you can see some pliers and paintbrushes, a dish of soapy water and a dish of clean water. Somewhere on the table is some vegetable glycerin there, super glue of all different varieties and thicknesses, one of the most important tools, insect pins, down as small as 000. If I could buy 50 pins, I would, but I haven't found anybody that makes them. In fact, I can't find 40 pins anymore. They used to be available. They are very, very fine pins, but the 30s are the smallest that I've got right now, and I need small pins, as you'll see. In the distance is my microscope, and I'm going to talk specifically about microscopes and what's required to do this kind of work. So this is where the process begins. The material that I collect goes in the plate, alcohol goes over that, and I pull out the debris, one leaf at a time, examining it front and back, because a leaf may have 15 organisms on it. And in a bowl like this, there are a lot of species that when they feel threatened in any way will get inside a leaf and they'll pull the leaf around them in a tube. And I have to open up all of those tubes, sometimes 50 of them, to find the spiders or whatever inside. So it's a very tedious process, but it's also great fun. And I used to do this with a $100 Amscope microscope, which was like a really good pair of reading glasses. Then I was able to get myself a Leica binocular scope, which is just makes doing this a joy. And that's what the workstation looks like. A couple of other things that you can see there that are important are blowers. That's one of the key tools, and filter paper with scissors to cut it into little strips. That's probably the most important dissecting tool on the table, the insect pins and the filter paper. And if you're going to attempt this, you need to get something like that. Filter paper does not leave threads behind. It's very clean. And if you buy some, buy the slow filter paper. They make them slow, fast, and medium. The most important factor is time when you're cleaning these bugs. And you have to be quick, but you can't be so quick that you're not ready for the next step. I have found that using any kind of absorbent blotting paper is too quick, but slow filter paper will leave just enough moisture on the bug to preserve the eyes and allow me to move the appendages. Blowers are crucial. Get one with the smaller nipple on it. The cheap one there on the right with the big red thing, useless. I mean, it's great for cleaning lenses, I'm sure, but it's not good for drying insects. Somebody at Christmas gave me a one like the one on the left, only wearing a neoprene outfit, and had a key ring on it and everything. Very, very fancy. It's just the same as this, though. Get the one with a little tiny hole at the end. Tweezers. I have a thing about tweezers. I bought a pack. This packet of tweezers is years old, and I bought them for something else entirely, and they're useless. So I got more tweezers, and this is a small part of my collection of tweezers. And the ones with the red rubber bands around them are the ones I use all the time. The others, not so much. Some I never use, but I'm going to show you how you have to prepare these. You cannot just use a pair of tweezers that you have that somebody's been picking their eyebrows with. You can't do that. The tweezers have to be absolutely flat and as sharp as needles to do this, because you're going to be picking off pieces of dirt off the eye of a mosquito. So you have to have very, very sharp tweezers. That's why I buy the cheap ones. I bought some expensive German ones, and you can't sharpen them. They want you to use them as sharp as they made them, and that's it. They don't want you hurting yourself or something. So yeah, buy the cheap Chinese ones, and this whole lot probably costs $20. And what I do is I use these little strips of aluminium that I get at the hardware shop. I wrap them in a very fine auto finish sandpaper, and that's what I use to keep the tweezers in condition. And I have to sharpen them every time I do this because they get dull just in the air, I think. That's a blunt pair right there. That's before I sharpen them. And you can't really see from this, but if you turn it sideways, the tips aren't meeting quite correctly, so they needed to be treated. That's after I've given them a good filing, and I've got one where they're closer together, but you can see that not only are the surfaces flat, but I narrow the tweezer as well, because what you have to do you have to get these in very small places. You'll be using them to tease the antennae out of facial grooves on tiny little nymph weevils, as well as spreading the legs on mosquitoes and things. If you don't have the very fine points, all you're going to do is rip the legs off or skewer the insect. Paintbrushes, these aren't the ones I use. I got some much better ones that only have a couple of millimeters of bristles and only have 3 or 4 bristles on each one, and they're very soft. That's like using a railroad tie to comb your hair, because that's what I do with these. I comb the hair on smaller insects to get the dust and dirt out of them. So getting a brush that's fine enough is very important. These ones I just trimmed a lot of the hairs off, but you have to have something very, very fine. We talked about insect pins. I go through a lot of them. Every insect I photograph uses at least a pin, and I never reuse them. These ones are enamel covered, and they have these golden tips that I don't really care for, but that you don't see them because they're wrapped in a material I'll show you in just a minute. So the smaller the pin, the better. For this kind of work, if you can get them at 4.0, great. Otherwise, 3.0 has to do. That's my old microscope, and I had it for years, and it worked perfectly. I didn't know you could get anything better than that until I got something better than that and realized how hard it was to work with that. But the key is stereo vision. You cannot clean and position insects of this size unless you have binocular vision, unless you have depth perception. You don't know where the tip of your tweezer is. You don't know where the tip of the paintbrush is, and you're going to damage the insect every time. So it's a problem I have because I'm trying to do a course on insect cleaning, and I bought a camera for my big microscope, and when the camera's turned on, my vision goes monocular because of the beam splitter. And so I'm dissecting away and everything's going great. And I turn the camera on and I start ripping the insects to shred, which is not what I want for the course. So if anybody has an idea how to get around that problem, that would be nice. The microscope I got was used. It's old. It's a Leica MZ6, and it's just absolutely optically the best thing I've ever looked through. And I was in a career with lots of microscopes in it, but this thing is something else. It's absolutely beautiful. These are going to be a few of your first glimpses of my subjects. This is how I find them. Once I've got the catch in a bowl with some alcohol and I start swilling things around, this is what I see. And my first step is to assess what I've got, decide what is photographable, because a lot of these very small insects, if they touch the net on the way in, it can destroy them. Yeah, it's a matter of carefully picking out the ones that have the most potential. This is an Anopheles mosquito, I think, and it's a typical size organism, 2 or 3 millimeters, and it's the longest running pain in this whole process for me is photographing the eye of a mosquito, and I'll explain why that is so difficult in a little bit. If you've done macro before and you've done macro with insects, you have pinned insects before, and you know that there are some guidelines for how to pin an insect so that it'll stay on the pin and you can position it appropriately. All of that goes out the window when you're dealing with things this size. Almost everything involves getting the pin into a good position where it will stick to the insect, and that's as good a handle as you're going to get. Mosquitoes, something I photograph constantly, their legs all come from one tuft of pre-leg under their thorax. And you can take a pin, like this is a 4-0 pin that I have just slid into the cluster of legs with a bit of glue on it. It'll hold steadier than just about any other mount there is with these little insects. So that's just one example. Abdomens are great, especially concave abdomens like hoverflies have. This is a tiny species of a hoverfly that we get that's more like the size of a midge. And yeah, one way I'll pin those is just using that concave abdomen. Long-legged flies are another that have a convex abdomen. These are examples of pinning that I photographed for the course. None of these insects are photographable. This one you can see his eyes have collapsed already, and he's already starting to rot. But that's the idea. You'll see that the actual photographs are quite a bit nicer than that. So the step is to go from in that bowl of green alcohol to clean and dry and on a pin. And there is a lot that can go wrong between those 2 points. This is an example of a little gnat that I was hopeful was going to be a good one. The pinning went really well. I'll call it pinning, even though it's not, it's gluing. But I loved the position he was in. I thought it was going to be great. But if you look at the right eye, you can see it's already collapsed. Eye collapse in compound eye collapse in insects this size is, for me, the number one problem to be solved. I think I've solved it, which is good news, but you're going to see a lot of collapsed eyes between now and when I tell you about that. Beetles are probably the easiest if you're gonna get into this. This is a dog Bane beetle, which is actually a very, very colorful metallic beetle that we have here, but they are teeny tiny. This one's just a couple of millimeters as well. Like you can see, that's just the tip of a 4-0 pin. And the abdomen is a great place to pin beetles because it's the least interesting part. They're probably not going to want to photograph, and it allows you to position them in some very interesting poses. We'll get into posing later, but I don't know about you. Find I find photographs of an insect flat with his legs out to be very boring to look at, unless it's a spectacular insect. And most insects are interesting but not spectacular. I go to a great deal of trouble to put insects in positions that are going to engage the viewer. So it's very important when you pin the insect, because if you're going to try to position appendages and antennae or the head to make an insect look like, for example, I don't know if you can see the one behind my head. It's one of my favorite photographs that I've ever taken, the weevil that's trotting towards the camera. That is a very small insect too. And the example there is you have to pin the insect when it's drying, but not when it's dry, so that you can have a stable handle from which to position the appendages. And also, you can't position appendages without very sharp tweezers and little points of filter paper. Sometimes you literally have no option. It's not picking the abdomen. It's and this isn't the as small as I go by any means, but this is a little ant. And the trick here is to get the tip of that pin to adhere to the abdomen of the ant, but to not spill any ink, any glue elsewhere on the ant. Super glue dries white. It's horrible and it's intrusive. And once it's on there forever. So these pinnings have to be done in one movement. You cannot touch the insect and then move the pin. It has to be nail it with the first motion and then hold it still long enough for the few molecules of cyanoacrylate that touch the abdomen to set. You can see there is very little glue on the pin. And that is because for this ant, I touched the pin in the glue and then wiped all the glue off. And I went with what was left, which dries in about 5 seconds. So you have to dip and wipe and touch and get it right every time. But that's what he looks like. That's what he looks like when he's photographed afterwards with the pin photoshopped out.
What size of pin is that, Alan? Sorry.
4.0, which is
That's the corner.
250 microns.
Wow. Okay.
Small.
Thanks.
Yeah, they get smaller than this too. This is one of those little red mites that crawl over the bricks at my old house in the south of England. I can't remember what they're actually called over there. But these little things are everywhere. This is an example of stopping and looking wherever you are. Well, maybe not if it's that cold there, but over here, go look at a tree or a piece of pavement or a plant, and you will find these. You just have to be quiet and still to see them. But yeah, they're everywhere. Though these and little seed ticks make for great practice. This is another dog Bane Beetle, and that's a 4.0 needle again, 4.0 pin. So you can see that we're getting down to a size where the entire organism is only a few times wider than the pin. We're going to be looking at some organisms where the pin is just a few times wider than the organism. These dog Bane beetles have the most bizarre skeleton, exoskeletal covering. The colors are mind-blowing. You don't think you're looking at something living when you see this. It looks like a disco ball, but it is a stunningly beautiful beetle. It has all of these colors shimmering. Of course, if you pick up one of these beetles, it looks like a grain of sand. You can't see anything. You have to look at it under the microscope to see the color. That's how tiny it is. We have a lot of bees and wasps that are the size of midges. You'll see them as the sun is going down. There'll be a cloud of little shiny spots flying around. You see them down at the Tweed. There are hundreds of different species, but these little bees and wasps make up a much larger proportion of them than I thought. So I'm always finding things I've never seen before, wasps and other Hymenoptera. So once the sorting is done, I do the cleaning. And I'm just showing this. I don't know when this is from. These are some big insects, but my process is very simple. I've done a lot of videos on using ultrasonic cleaning and other very aggressive cleaning methods for big insects. For these little guys, none of that. None of that. No harsh chemicals. I put a drop of fairy liquid in some cool water. I agitate them gently. If they're big enough to grab an appendage, I'll move them around in the fairy liquid solution, which often I'll put a crystal or two of a surfactant in to break the surface tension. Then I'll put them in cool water to rinse, and then I'll put them in alcohol. And I use almost pure ethanol. It's not pure. You can't buy pure ethanol here, but you can buy 195 proof. It turns out people drink it here. It's called, can't remember, Everclear or Neverclear. I don't recall, but it's almost pure alcohol, and it preserves colors way better than isopropyl alcohol does. I don't know if you can access that over there, but if you're moved to do this kind of thing, that's the best choice. This is the pot from which all the rest of the photographs that we're going to be looking at today came from. And by no means are we going to look at all of these. And not all of them have been photographed yet. But there are a couple in particular that I want you to pay attention to, because I don't think you're going to expect to see what these actually look like when they're photographed. But that's the general lay of the land. I ask you to turn your attention to the white dot in the middle of the plastic at the back of the pot. This is through the big microscope, by the way. If you look due north, there's an insect off on his own, crawling north. If you look to his left, due west, there's a white smudge on the picture. Okay, that's one of the things we're going to look at in a minute. There was also a grain of mud, a ball of mud, that I want you to remember this one as well. I'm going to come back to him shortly. That was him after I fished him out on a 4-0 pin. We'll get back to him. This is an insect whose name I'm not actually sure of, because I can't get the name Gwyneth Paltrow out of my head when I see it. These are very common around here, and they're the craziest looking things. But if you're able to get them pinned, and the only way I've found that works is to use a curved pin with some glue on it and touch them in the mid-abdomen on the back. One of the things that these insects do is, over time, and remember, we're dealing very short time scales. We got to get this photograph before it dries up. But they also have a tendency to sag under gravity. So when you're pinning one of these, you need to pin it in a way that it is going to be axial to where it would sag. In other words, these things have a tendency to tip backwards, fold in half backwards. By putting the pin here, that minimizes that. They may still flop forwards, but that's one look. And there's another look from the side where the pin is following the contour of the back. There's a view from the front. And these are very nondescript looking things, and they're very small. But when you see what the finished photograph looks like, you'll see where I got the Gwyneth Paltrow thing from. I was looking at the final picture. That's it from the side, by the way. You can see the pin has been bent again. This was a trying a different pose, but it is going up the back. The front is all legs. The top is head and thorax, and the wings are covering the abdomen. But it looked like Gwyneth Paltrow walking out of a Starbucks coffee shop in a Halloween costume dressed up as a fly to me. This is a pinned blob from that little dish. I'm showing this because at the time it was my crowning achievement. It's a jumping spider on a 4-0 pin. That's about as good as I could get with my phone, but I did get a picture with a lens on the phone, and that was him pinned under the microscope when I was washing him. And that is his portrait, the final shot. This was the smallest spider I had photographed up to this point. But it shows that it shows that you can get a picture of just about anything if you're patient and if you're lucky. Luck is a huge part of this. Somebody that didn't have any luck was this revolting creature. This is one of those things that crawls up and down the trees that looks like the top of a Q-tip. They're gosh, I can't remember what they're called. I should have looked this up, but they're very primitive. The cluster of grapes on the side of its head, that's all it's got for a compound eye. But it's got makes up for it by having 3 sets of pincer jaws. If you look carefully, I didn't include the other photograph. I wonder if I can make that smaller. No, there's another one that shows a better picture of his back, but his coat is made of the skeletons of other things. It's really a nightmarish creature. And I have a whole series of things that look cute or harmless to the naked eye and look just terrifying to this lens at this magnification. So you'll remember in the dish, I pointed you to 12 o'clock, and there was the thing trucking to the right at 12 o'clock. Well, that was this little fella, the one with the dual exhaust pipes coming out of his tummy there. That's what he photographed too. Which I love this picture. It's very subtle. There's nothing flashy about this guy except his red eyes and his terrible dandruff. But it's another one that I'm sitting there shaking my head. I didn't know these things existed. Not being a trained entomologist, I see things like this every day that just blow me away. That was shot at 10 times magnification with a Nikon CFI plan objective and a Raynox tube lens. Most of the stuff I do at this size is either 5, 10, or 20x with Mitutoyo or Nikon objectives. This is the largest bug in the pot. It's a plant bug. Nice colors. I like the light green and the blue eyes. But I accidentally mixed this up with a plant bug from a different pot. This is not the same organism. I think it might be the same species, but it's not the exact same bug. But I included it to show off the nice eyes. So the little thing to the left of that, the white stain, this is probably as far as I am going to be able to take this. This is a springtail, and springtails are primitive. They're not insects. 6-legged, they're hexapods like insects, but they have those 2 appendages out the back, which are springs, if you will, and they'll straighten those things out, and they'll catapult themselves into the air, but they are much smaller than a pin. And when I saw this guy, I didn't know if it would even be possible to get him out of the water. That's him after agitating the water till he rolled over on his side. Take note of the antenna, which is draped over the side of his face like a pigtail, because that will be important in identifying him in a coming photograph. So I was able to get him out on the tip of a piece of that slow filter paper. That's him stuck to the edge of the filter paper with a 4/0 pin next to him. That's him posing as Snoopy with his tip of his springtail stuck to the super glue. That's not easy to do. If you're going to try this, you have to brace your body and your fingers and everything on the table. The movement is just so little to get the part you want stuck to the pin. But he stayed stuck on. But what happens to little tiny creatures when you try to photograph them is they dry out, and you have minutes to get them on a pin and photographed, or this happens. I'm showing this, and I'm going to be showing my failures so that I can make these points. But if you're going to try to photograph a tiny little bug like this, you've got to do the prep work by the camera, and you've got to have your lights, your camera on. You have to be ready to shoot the stack. And even if you're like me and you shoot 16-second gaps so there's no vibration, you have to bend the rules here. You have to shoot fast. And that goes for a lot of these creatures. But as bad as that looks, as my first of the species, and you can see both eyes, and it actually looks like an organism. It was pretty good. This was the second one I shot, which is sitting down or laying down, but you can actually start to see the outline of the creature. They don't have eyes. They have 4 eye patches on either side of their head, the little brown spots. That's what they register light with. And probably the crowning achievement when it comes to sub-insects was the third one that I found, which I'll show you right after this. That's just a crop of the guy. You can see the pigtail that I was telling you about. And this is the last one that I did. I just got really lucky with the pin. And you can see the poor thing's already bloated, but it kind of helps you to see the eye spots. That's the reddish brown spots on the side of the head there. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When I first saw that, I couldn't believe that I was looking at it. And these things live in leaf litter, and it's a great thing if you're in a temperate climate anywhere. It's a great thing for winter to go out and find these things. You just dig through leaf litter and you'll find well, you won't know you found them till you get home, but the leaves are covered in them. There are a lot of insects I'm not going to be able to tell you the names of because by the time I get to the bottom of the pot, I'm pulling things out that are so small that I don't even know which end to put the pin on. And then sometimes I'll luck into something gorgeous like this, but again, I'm really not sure what group it's in. Spiders are abundant here, and they show up in every catch. And they're great fun to play with as far as posing and positioning. They're one of the few that even at the very small size, you can use one of these tiny paintbrushes to position all 8 of the appendages to where you've got an interesting pose. They're very easy to make threatening just by lifting their front appendages up or lifting their pedipalps on the side of their head. They're great fun to work with, and sometimes just dead straight on. This was the big spider that was at the bottom part of the pot, a crab spider. This is a little plant bug, and I show this just to reiterate how you don't know what you're going to find. I've never seen a cream-colored bug with this electric green colorations. And it's just, I'll sit and look at it under the microscope for half an hour because they are just so beautiful, these things. And you would be amazed how well they photograph if you can just get them on a pin. These bizarre looking creatures that look like they should be out of a Doctor Who episode are flower bugs, also called tumbling bugs. When they feel threatened, they just pull their legs in and tumble and fall off the leaf. And once they do, they just keep tumbling. And I don't know where they end up, but you can never catch them. So it's a very effective maneuver. But if you luck upon one of these things, and these are small, they're like little grains of black rice. It's another beautiful creature. These ones were a little easier to work with because they're very hard. You can get them clean very easily. It would be a great thing to start with. I know you guys have all kinds of flower bugs over there, similar to this. They're a great practice insect. They're small, but flies are good if you can keep their eyes intact. They take special care with legs. Flies are a lot of species of flies have detachable legs, believe it or not. They pop out of the fly and leave a completely dry, intact socket. It's one of their escape mechanisms, especially long-legged flies, crane flies, and mosquitoes. So never grab a fly by an appendage. You'll pull it off for certain. So if a species like this, I went straight from alcohol to a pin before I tried to straighten the appendages. You can see that they're still in the position they'd fall into at death. So how would you straighten the legs, or how would you position the legs of something this small without touching the legs? That's what your blower is for. By carefully and patiently blowing room temperature air from the back and then the front, these legs will eventually straighten out. They won't straighten out completely, but they'll be out enough for you to move them with the tip of a paintbrush. Same with the wing; it'll unstick from the abdomen. And what you will end up with is a choice. Once you've started drying and cleaning with the filter paper points, you can wipe the dirt off them. You'll start to see opportunities. Now that's another key part of this process, is keeping your creative juices flowing when you're holding the pin with this tiny thing on it. You need to think as you look through the microscope, where do I bend the pin? How does the pin need to lean? Where am I going to position this appendage or that appendage? And I have devised this way of mounting the pin. You'll see macro photographers will spend hundreds of dollars on these fancy stages with knobs and buttons on them, which are lovely. I mean, I have one, but you don't need it, or you shouldn't be using it for this stuff. I take a little piece of blue tack and roll it into a worm shape. Then I wrap the worm around the end of the pin like a turban. squeeze it into place, and then just place it right in front of the microscope objective. And once you do it a few thousand times, you'll know by how you squeeze the blue tack which way the pin's going to bend, how the antennae are going to be positioned relative to the camera. So getting this guy 3/4 facing the camera with the head up enough that the antennae hold their position, and into the bargain managing to hide most of the pin, was something I thought about before I went to the camera. So this was already planned. This shot was, and shot at 5 times magnification, and it's a cracker. It worked out really well, but it worked out well because I'd thought about it before I tried to do it. Spiders, like crab spiders, are about the easiest to do because their death leg position is actually very similar to their live leg position, and they look fearsome any way you do them. All you have to do with these is dab the 4/0 pin on the abdomen with them on their back, and they'll stick to it, and they'll be a piece of cake. And you can just bend a right angle in the end of the pin and point it at the camera. Jumping spiders are a little bit more difficult because of the very loose connection between the abdomen and the thorax. So you have to give the abdomen some support with the pin. Otherwise, the belly will flop down and you'll see it in the photograph. I couldn't pin this guy right, so I changed my perspective with the camera. Of course, I didn't move the camera. I moved the pin and the blue tack to where it looks like I'm shooting from above down onto him. And I include this to show that if you pin with intent with these little things, you can put them in virtually any position you can think of. And as you'll see in some of the other pictures, it has a real impact on how the image looks. This is a tiny little red ant that ended up in my catch. And yeah, it was again a matter of changing a perspective around to make a fairly boring ant look pretty fearsome. One thing I found is if you have an insect that looks cuddly and friendly, you want to shoot it from below, or that give the impression of being below, and use lighting that results in a gradient towards the back. If you do that, the insect suddenly looks massive. It looks like a blue whale. One of the many flies we have that have these incredibly unfortunate mouth parts. This is one of my mistakes I wanted to show you what you can end up with if you don't do a thorough job of cleaning the insect. On something like this that is hairy, bristly, and has hooks on its claws and all these crevices on the body, what I'll do is I will rinse it in soapy water, rinse it in cool water, dry the abdomen with a tip of filter paper, stick a pin on it, and then go back to washing it. Because once the pin is dried, if you're very gentle and careful, you can wash it further. All of these little hairs, I don't know where they came from, need to be gone. So this is an appalling job, and I would never show this picture, which is a shame because I've never seen one of these, whatever it is, with the spines in the back and the yellow eyes and the stripy socks on. Amazing creature. I was so disappointed. So being thorough with your cleaning and knowing which ones are going to take more than less. We were talking about posing earlier on. This was a throwaway shot. It was a bad shot of a wasp with big antennae because the thorax was damaged. And I shot it anyway because I liked the look of its head from behind. With the way the antennae were twirling at the end. And I throw this in there just to show that you can get pretty creative with these shots too, because you're dealing with subjects that nobody's familiar with seeing. So it's an amazing thing to look at and to to further imagine that it's gazing up at the moon just adds a little bit of surreal feel to it. And this kind of thing appeals to me because it's, I don't know, crazy probably, but anyway, I just show that as an example of the fact that I'm not completely without artistic bent. This is an example of that anthropomorphizing that I do. This is a tiny little bee, a sweat bee we call them. They land on you in the summer and drink the sweat off you, but they are incredibly photogenic. And if this one doesn't look like it's blowing a kiss to somebody, then I don't know what it's doing. But that's what it looked like to me when I saw it. So I actually used that as the cover art for one of my videos. It just looks too cute for words. This is not a good picture of a bug that became my favorite to shoot at this scale. I've worked on this one species. It's an ichneumon wasp. It's a wasp that looks like a fly, that has the strangest body shape. They're very, very common around here, but you can't see them. They are just so teeny tiny, but they've got these iridescent wings that catch the sun. So you'll see them twinkling, but you'll never see them. And I started to realize I was catching a lot of them, but they're so fragile because of their long appendages that they're hard to get intact. So I have some pictures I'm going to show at the very end, and between now and then of this insect, and I kind of use it as a gauge for how I'm doing with my technique when I look at that my shots of that insect. This is my standard setup. I use a Nikon PB6 bellows for virtually everything. I use a crop frame camera just to keep, but some of these are 500 and 600 shot stacks. So I try to keep my data manageable. I use a Raynox DCR 150 as my relay lens, and I position it at 208 millimeters, since I've run a whole bunch of tests and had a friend of mine, an optical engineer, do the same thing. And we have both come up with 208 millimeters as the sweet spot for the Raynox DCR 150 in the forward orientation. So I just put it on the bellows at that distance and go with a 20 millimeter infinity space and a Mitutoyo M-Plan 5X microscope objective. And that is my go-to setup on a stack shot rail. This, unfortunately, is not mine. This beautiful gadget was made by a friend of mine, Bud Perot, a supporter of my channel, who invented this from a Scottish fly tying device that he got from somewhere. And yeah, so if you've got a spare one of those, you should send it to me so that I can make one of them. I looked into buying one over here, and they're unbelievably expensive, but it's a great way to hold a specimen. It would be perfect for this. That is my objective. That's an old one, actually. That is belonged to a friend of mine who lent it to me. Mine is new and shiny. That's the other objective I use for 10x. It's the Nikon CFI Plan 10x. Beautiful, beautiful, short working distance objective. You got to be very close to the subject. That's my new Mitutoyo. The reason that people will pay 700-800 pounds for one of these lenses, and people do pay that, is because quite literally it is the sharpest lens at 5x that you can buy in the world today. There are things like the key optic that are 3-4 times the price of this. No, 10 times the price of this. That are equally sharp, but this is the gold standard. You won't get a sharper lens, and they're available in 1, 2, 5, 7.5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 magnification. I have the 5 and the 20. That's the 20 there. They're big and heavy and perfectly clear. That's it mounted on a slightly different setup using, again, the Raynox in the forward position, but with a longer infinity space. The infinity space between the edge of the picture on the right and the objective on the left, if you are going to do some of this, photography using microscope lenses, the distance between your Raynox, which is called the tube lens or relay lens, and the objective is crucial if you're going to get good contrast. Sometimes if that space is too short, you get off-axis light bouncing into the objective, and you end up with hazy images. It's just something to think about. We got to talk about lights, and I have used every combination, every type of light that you can think of in my macro photography. And the most revolutionary change happened this last year with the release of the Godox MF12 flashes. Now, I always thought that the Nikon's version of this, the R1C1, would be a great macro tool. But I had no idea how much better these were than the speed lights that I've been using. Now, I use 6 or 7 speed lights for a shot because I have a conviction that when you're photographing at small scale, it is absolutely crucial that the light that is hitting the subject be hitting the subject from a larger surface than itself. If you imagine you are an insect, you need to look at the diffusion that's between you and the light. And when the flash fires, you need to see a wall of light. If you can see a blob of light or a point of light, you're going to have specular highlights in that photograph. And that's the one thing you can't have at this scale is blown highlights. So instead, when these flashes came out, my viewers bought me a set of 4 of them, which was awfully nice. I've got another 4 now. Godox sent me some, and I will cluster these lights at the lowest power setting, like you would if you were trying to get the smoothest, evenest light you possibly can. So I use multiple layers of diffusion, multiple flashes, and it's complicated how I set it up. This is a stripped down version of it where you can see 3 lights with an extra layer of diffusion directly over my subject. If you do this, and if you can keep all the distances about right for the power, you end up with a very smooth, even, no highlights kind of light with very natural looking drop-offs. And the overall effect is it takes something that is absolutely tiny and it gives it scale because of the way the light is interacting with. When you see a fly, you don't think, oh, look how the light drops off to the end of that fly. No, you see a fly. I mean, it's either in the sun or it's in the shade. At this scale, you have to give it that mass. And the way you do that is with these lights and picking the right direction so that when the light hits it, it does drop off as it goes around the fly. And it gives it this otherworldly sense of heft. And it works even down to the scale. This is a red ant at 20 times magnification, just to show the detail of the eye. And also to remind me that eyes are probably the number 1 shot ruiner in this business. Compound eyes are very complicated structures. They consist of long tubes the kind of tubes that you put in your golf bag if you were protecting your golf bag. That probably doesn't make any sense to anybody, does it? That might be an American thing. Anyway, these long tubes are all clustered together into one eye, functionally one eye, but they're actually individual lenses. And the structure that holds them together internally is very delicate and prone to injury from force, number one, but also to liquefaction and collapse, another. All compound eyes will collapse if you leave them long enough. And that is the most crucial element time-wise in getting a cleaned insect into the rig to photograph and get it photographed. There's a good chance its eye will collapse during the stack, but if you start at the front and work to the back, maybe you'll be through with the eye by the time the eyes collapse. That's my goal. I always start at the eye so that I can rocket through it. This, because it had such long antennas, by the time I got back to the eyes, they'd collapsed on both sides. And this is a major problem if you do this kind of photography. What I recommend doing is removing the alcohol by soaking them in cold water for 20 minutes, and then take them out of that and soak them in a mixture of vegetable glycerin and water, 5% thereabouts, for about 10 minutes. Then take them out and dry them, but not all the way, as you're headed to the camera, and then get them mounted and photographed. And I'll show you some of my results where I was able to do that. This is another thing that happens if they don't collapse. Sometimes you'll get this weird silver eye thing. What it is the internal components of the eye collapse away from the surface components, leaving this keratinous type of transparent, these are the lenses basically, or the lens coverings. The rest of the eyes collapsed on the inside. And you can see this happen in real time through on the live view of the camera. You'll literally see the silver march across the eye. And once that happens, the shot's lost. This was going to be a keeper mosquito eye at 20 times magnification. And you can see half the eye looked okay. The other half was in the process of collapsing. This is a series that I wanted to show you of the collapse happening. Isn't that amazing? That's both eyes collapsing in at the same time. That's the final shot, because there was just enough color left from the early shots to fill in some of the gaps, but it obviously ruined. Like his haircut though. And that's something you need to think about every time you do a high magnification shot when you're hoping to get the eye of something this small, is how can I get this done as quickly as possible? The prize, if you can do it, are some of the most breathtaking images of these eyes. They can be stunning. They look like Michael Jackson sunglasses. Some of them do. Those things on the middle of its forehead are called the Johnson's organs. They're how these things deal with balance. Anyway, that's an eye that was ruined by the collapse at the bottom, but it hasn't turned silver. It's just sagged. But there was enough of that eye left for me to crop in and use this as a background for something. So you can see the colors are just otherworldly. I want to show this to emphasize the problem that I started out talking about, of getting these creatures into alcohol immediately. This poor little weevil, I didn't even know it was a weevil till after I'd photographed it, split open at the middle from decomposition and gas buildup while I was pinning him. So you really do have to move fast. This is one of our green sweat bees, an iridescent green sweat bee. They are the most photogenic of our bees, and I don't take these or any other pollinators, but every now and again you just end up with one in the bag. You can't help it. They are just amazing creatures. I love them. This was the strangest thing that I pulled out of that petri dish. This is a tree hopper of some kind. I've never seen anything like it. This is an assassin bug nymph, and it's included as an example of how you can take something as simple as one of these little spiny leg nymphs, and by positioning it right with your pin, you can get this kind of perspective, which I would challenge you to find any photograph of a nymph assassin bug from the front like this. They're just too small to even imagine what they would look like from the front. They're very odd looking from the front. This is a caterpillar. It's just actually just a little inchworm. It had no character to it at all. It was just a little yellow squiggle of nothing at the bottom of the jar. But when I got him pinned and cleaned up, kind of cleaned up, I don't know whether those things on his face are eyes or a nose or what they are, but it is a fearsome looking creature with pincers all over the place. Inchworm, amazing. This is another one of those tiny little bees. You saw him earlier on a pin, the one with the black one with the curved pin on the abdomen. This is what he looks like in profile up close. This is a millipede that was about a half a centimeter in length, very, very small. I put a 4/0 pin up inside the chest so that I could have him upright. But most of his body parts are translucent. They're so thin and delicate. Beautiful, beautiful creature. This is one of our Lyme disease spreading ticks that are so common down here. It's actually empty. It hasn't had a blood meal. I slightly reddened the color of the abdomen, which was otherwise kind of brown. This was easy to pin. I just put him on the tip of a bent pin, the last millimeter bent at right angles. That's what the pliers are for. Another one of the ubiquitous spiders. These things fill your pots, and usually they'll just keep eating the other insects until you dispatch them. So yeah, you've got to be quick. They never stop eating or shredding. Remember that ball of dirt that I asked you to remember from earlier? Well, this is it. It is a fungus weevil that is one of the most amazing creatures I have ever seen. And I was fiddling around with this thing and looking at it on the pin and kept thinking, that looks like an appendage. And then I caught a glimpse of what looked like an eye. And it all suddenly became apparent what I was looking at. Is a guy with a big nose who's got his head down inside a woolly jumper that's 3 sizes too big, and he's crawling towards you. And you can't unsee that. And this is the most amazing thing I've seen since I've been doing this. I was getting ready to throw this away, thinking it really was just a ball of muck. But that's his eye and his upside down eyelashes, and utterly amazing creature. This was shot at 20 times magnification. I'm going to show you just the last few. This little guy I included just because of the size of him. Again, this was a sub-millimeter lace bug. It was just a fleck on the side of the petri dish when I was finished. This is some kind of a wasp I've never been able to identify. I was only able to get this one shot before he started to fall apart, but I don't know what it is even, but it is gorgeous. It's another one of our viridescent green sweat bees that and that is a bad pinning job because the left wing looks like a pin, and it's not. That guy has had his pin removed. It's unfortunate. I wish I'd shot him at a different angle, but still, looks like that. I named that one Coming Into Land, and it's a nice print. So this is the wrap up. The insect that I've been trying to photograph all this time and had so much trouble with is this incredibly delicate little ichneumon wasp. They're common, but they're seldom ever intact when you get them. And I have shot these a lot, and I finally got to where I was able to get them clean enough and well posed to get some photographs that I'm actually proud of. Their wings are like nothing on earth. And there's the last picture. This one just looks like the human characteristics thing again. This looked like it had been flying across from left to right and heard your voice and turned to see what was going on. That look of surprise on its face is very common in this wasp. I just love that pose. But the next pose is my favorite. This is a photograph I gave to my son for Christmas this year, framed. Oh no, it's the one after this. This is a different kind of wasp, even smaller. It's a 1 millimeter wasp, a chalcid wasp. It's got these big puffy calves from walking upstairs, I suppose. And this was the one I was saying that I gave to my son. It's the chalcid wasp also, with it's just the most perfect specimen that I've come across, and the photograph really worked out well, and that's what all this is about. It's a lot of hard work, uh, a lot of hard work. I throw away 150 photographs for one that I keep, and then this is one in 100, if that. This last one. So it's not probably a good commercial prospect, but if you want some excitement and some fun and a challenge, and see if your hands are as still as you think they are, photograph a 1 millimeter chalcid wasp like that, and you'll have great fun. That's it. That's all I've got. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Yes, Alan, I've got one. I mean, these
Yes,
things are small, but I would imagine that it'll be the normal reproduction system, that these things lay eggs, which hatch out and grow into adults. Have you ever went down that road and try and find the eggs?
Oh yeah, they lay. Uh, they all do it differently, but these wasps are all parasitic wasps. They lay their eggs in other insects, and a lot of the larvae live off the contents of the other insects, and they hatch out fully adult. The thing is that there is an absolute limit to how close I can get, and this is that limit as far as I know. So even if I was to find them, I couldn't photograph them with the equipment that I've got. Um, it's below this, it's microscope time.
You mentioned that you use stacks. How many images in a stack, and what software do you use to merge?
I use Zerine Stacker as my stacking software. It is streets ahead of anything else that's on the market, including Helicon Focus, which just released a new beta. But you really need to use Zerine if you're going to do this, because these are all big stacks. This image here was 400 images, and because of the wingspan, when the wings are out, you have a lot of images you have to capture to get all the wings in focus. 500 images you have to slab, or you have to create substacks and then retouch from the substacks. Only Zerine can do that. I use Photoshop to finish up. I use Topaz occasionally to upsize and occasionally to sharpen. But the average is 150 to 200 slices for a regular, very small bug. But it can go way higher than that. 1,200 is the largest stack I've ever had to do.
How much hard disk space do you need?
Hard disk space? Well, I've got 7 8-terabyte drives on my desk, and they're all full. And I've got a new Mac that I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do. I need something better. There's a trick though. If you're going to do this, if you are disciplined about it, and after every stack you throw away everything but the final image, it's no big deal. In fact, you end up with a lot less pictures than if you go out and shoot landscapes. Because I mean, a day's work, if I work as hard as I can work, I'll do 6 to 7 images a day. Now, while that might be several thousand shutter activations, it can, at the end of the day, it can be 7 or 10 images on a disk. So yeah, I'm bad about hanging on to them because I'm never quite sure if I'm going to want to run the stack again, but I'm getting better at it. So you've got to have fast temporary space. So having an SSD external or a big SSD in your computer would be perfect. Put everything on that and then dump it at the end of the session.
So, Alan, have you got an automated system for firing the shutter in between movements for the refocus?
Yes, I use a device called the Stack Shot by a company called Cognisys in America. It's the gold standard. You may have heard of WeMacro is a knockoff of that from China. MKJZZ is another one. But really, if you want the most reliable, best device that's going to last a lifetime, Cognisys Stack Shot, the old-fashioned one. And if you're going to buy one, buy the long one. They come in a short and a long, and the short's a bit short. The long's perfect. That's the one I have.
So what sort of time scale for a full range of it for one insect? How long would it take from start to finish?
Well, if you cut out the prep of the insect as being part of the prep of all the insects, I mean that I wouldn't count that. Once the insect's in alcohol and I take it out, clean it, pin it, dry it, photograph it, honestly, the size I'm using when you're through, the pin and the bug go in the rubbish. Big insects, I'll photograph for a year in and out of alcohol. These things, they're out for an hour. They're time to dump them. 30 minutes. If it's a very small one, 30 minutes should give me the full stack. If it's a huge tiny insect, long, then yeah, maybe an hour, but not more than that. It's a time commitment. You have to plan around it. You have to. I will plan the 7 insects I'm going to photograph the day before, and I'll have them in separate pots. And when I start, I am prepping the next one while I'm photographing the first one. And I just keep going. I mean, and when I have a long stack, I'll have time to come in here and write a paragraph or whatever.
When you say you dry them, do you let them dry naturally? Because with everything you've been saying, if you used any heat source or fan or something, it wouldn't work.
I use those little camera lens cleaners, the little blowers, and when
I use them.
But it's not. You're not if you did a good squeeze on one, its legs would come off for sure. It's teeny tiny puffs with your fingertips, and it just keeps the air moving. Timing's everything. You one puff too many, and their eyes will collapse from being too dry. So yeah, it's probably a good idea not to do this actually, because it will drive you mad.
It's like everything.
It's been wonderful.
It did me, but they say it was an improvement. So Well, thanks very much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it. It was great to come back and talk to you, and I hope there was something in there that was remotely useful or at least entertaining.
Very entertaining.
Thank you, Alan. That was absolutely breathtaking. That's, I think, the appropriate word. And you took us through everything from Nikon objectives, Leica microscopes to blue tack. So you covered the entire spectrum. I'm glad blue tack still has a role to play. And so could we all show our appreciation and a round of applause for you? I very much hope to see you in person at some point.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of counting on an in-person invite for next year's meeting.
You know, almost guarantee it.
All right. I get invited, I'll come over. I haven't been over back home to the UK in 4 years now, 5 years. They probably won't let me in.
We'll
They
put
watch
in
my
a word
YouTube
for you.
videos, they definitely won't let me back in. Have a happy new year, everybody.
Yeah, all the very best.
And you, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for 2021 and looking forward to a spectacular 2022. See you in a few days. Take care. Good night.